So you want to be a registered dietitian? You are in the right place. My name is Jenny Westerkamp, founder of All Access Dietetics, and your host for Dear Future Dietitian, a podcast dedicated to helping you feel more confident in every step of your journey towards that RD credential. Thank you for being here and taking the time to listen to this episode and investing in yourself and your future career. I can already tell you're going to be a rockstar dietitian. Now let's get into it.
So that was all about enteral nutrition. Now let's get into parenteral nutrition, or PN. So again, we're going to talk about the who, what, where, when, why. But just before we talk about that, I did want to put in this quote from Dr. Stanley J. Dudrick, who's actually the father of parenteral nutrition. He founded it back in the 1960s, and it's changed nutrition for so many. It's saved the lives of so many individuals, especially those who really cannot use their GI tract, but they need a source of nutrition. Dr. Dudrick was the one who found that we can feed directly into the person's blood, that we can give dextrose and we can give amino acids directly into the person's blood in order to help them survive and in order to give them the nutrition that they need. So he said this quote, and it just makes so much sense with thinking about what parenteral nutrition is, right? He says that the ultimate nutrition goal is always to provide optimal nutrition to all patients under all conditions at all times. So we know what that means. Usually, nutrition, the ideal way usually is by mouth. And if it's not by mouth, we use their GI tract, right, to reap from all those benefits of using the GI tract. He was able to tell us that, hey, if a person's GI tract is not working, we can feed directly into the blood. He's really the father of parenteral nutrition, and he unfortunately did pass away early last year. So I did want to include this quote because he definitely changed, the nutrition field for us and for all medical professionals. So parenteral nutrition, what and where? So parenteral nutrition is where nutrients are supplied directly into the blood via two different possible methods. So again, directly into the blood, you're bypassing the entire digestive tract. So there's two types. There's PPN, or peripheral parenteral nutrition, or TPN, total parenteral nutrition. And you can kind of see the difference in this picture right here in the middle. So PPN, or peripheral parenteral nutrition, is supplied directly via a peripheral vein. So those are usually the small veins in the arm that are used to draw blood or place an IV. This is a very temporary method of nutrition just because the peripheral veins are very, very prone to collapsing. They can't, once you go past a certain amount of osmolality of the formula, the vein can collapse and it can break. And so that's why it's considered something temporary, because you are limited to a certain osmolality for the PPN formulas, you are not able to feed a person 100% or even 75% of their needs usually with PPN. So it's a very temporary source of nutrition because you're never going to be able to meet a person's need fully with PPN. It's very commonly used to supplement if a person isn't able to meet their needs with PO or with enteral nutrition. But as a sole source of nutrition, it's very temporary, again, because you cannot meet a person's full needs. Total parenteral nutrition, or TPN, so this is where it's supplied directly via a direct line to the heart or vena cava. So this is usually either a central line, which are over here, and I think there's a picture on the next slide, or a PICC line. So that's a peripherally inserted central catheter. So that's basically when a catheter is inserted through a peripheral vein, but it's a catheter that leads directly into the vena cava. So although the formula is being inserted into the peripheral vein, it's being inserted through a catheter that is threaded into the vena cava. And so the person isn't getting that osmolality, that high amount of osmolality into the peripheral vein. They are getting it directly into their heart and vena cava. So this is a more longer approach for a person who needs parenteral nutrition, and it can be given for a longer amount of time than just temporary, like PPN. So again, I think we all just talked about this, but PPN, you can only give a low concentration of solutes and dextrose because the veins are very delicate and can collapse. Therefore, it's very hard to meet nutrient needs. Because you can't really meet a lot of their needs, and there's only a certain amount or a certain percentage of dextrose and amino acids that you can give, it does require it does have a large volume, because you have very little nutrients and therefore more volume. And so it's not good for those individuals who have a lot of fluid restrictions or a lot of fluid retention, because you are adding more volume to their body. And it's usually limited to 800 to 900 milliosmoles. TPN is a higher concentration of nutrients, so it has less amount of volumes. And you can use it for those individuals who have fluid restriction, obviously, within a certain amount. Obviously, you need to control because they are still getting volume, but it's definitely not as much a volume as if you would be giving peripheral parental nutrition. And you can meet a person's full nutrient needs with TPN. However, because you are exposing them, you do have a line that leads directly into the heart that's open. That can definitely make a person be at higher risk for infection. And so that's definitely a disadvantage of TPN. So what does parental nutrition contain? It contains just like what we have in an enteral formula. It has carbohydrates, amino acids, and fats and lipids. So carbohydrate will usually be dextrose. So this is something to keep in mind for when you're doing your calculations. Dextrose isn't your typical carbohydrate that has 4 calories per gram. It contains 3.4 calories per gram. And any concentration above 10% dextrose cannot be given via peripheral line or via peripheral parenteral nutrition, only TPN. So for example, you may see a 25% dextrose solution. That just means that there are 25 grams of dextrose per every 100 milliliters of solution. We also have amino acids, and these amino acids also, like the regular amino acids that we have, right? They provide 4 calories per gram. There are many different concentrations, just like the dextrose one. And for example, a 10% amino acid solution means that it provides 10 grams of amino acids per every 100 milliliters of formula. And the concentration can be the same for TPN and PPN. It doesn't really affect the concentration. So like with dextrose, we want to make sure that we don't go above 10%. With amino acids, you don't really have to be that careful with that concentration. And then fat and lipids. So obviously you need to provide fat and lipids to prevent essential fatty acid deficiency, and also just to provide more calories. We know that fat provides more calories than all the other macronutrients. And so in order to provide more calories into the person when they're on parenteral nutrition, we can give them fat. So usually that would be based on soybean oil. It can also be based on safflower oil, fish oil, and olive oil based intralipid or lipid formulations are made nowadays. They're not very common. They're very expensive. So the soybean oil is the most common one. And these lipid emulsions are available in either 10, 20, or 30% solutions. So you definitely want to know this as well for when you're doing your calculations. So if they tell you that it's a 10% lipid emulsion, that provides 1.1 calories per milliliter. If it's a 20% lipid emulsion, it provides 2 calories per milliliter. And if it's a 30% lipid emulsion, it provides 3 calories per milliliter. And if the emulsion if the lipids, are not in an emulsion, so it comes together in the bag with the dextrose and the amino acids. It's not a separate lipid emulsion, which we're going to talk about, how sometimes you may have them together, sometimes you may have them separately. Usually if it comes separately, you just have to use the normal amount of calories per gram that fat provides to calculate or to do that calculation. So just know that it provides 9 calories per gram. So if it's not in an emulsion, 9 calories per gram. But if it's in a 10%, 20%, or 30% emulsion, you definitely want to know how many calories it provides per milliliter, because it will be different. So again, remember the golden rule of nutrition support. If the gut works, use it. So of course, when we use parenteral nutrition, it's going to be when the gut doesn't work. So what are the candidates? Who are the candidates for parenteral nutrition? Individuals with peritonitis, individuals who have persistent post-op ileus, so things aren't going down. If there's an intestinal hemorrhage or obstruction, a distal high output fistula, there's severe GI bleeding, if a person has intractable vomiting and diarrhea, treatment toxicity in cancer patients, individuals with short bowel syndrome, severe acute pancreatitis if they're intolerant to enteral nutrition. So again, like we mentioned before, usually all the contraindications for enteral nutrition are the indications for parenteral nutrition. So again, if trials of enteral nutrition have failed or there's inadequate access to the GI tract, if enteral nutrition is contraindicated, right, like we just mentioned, or the intestinal tract has diminished function. If someone can't be fed enterally and they're very malnourished, obviously you want to go directly to the PN route. If they can't be fed enterally, but they are really not malnourished and you're not expected to not be able to feed them for less than 7 days, then you don't really have to go the PN route. You don't have to expose them and give them that potential source of infection. You can just keep them NPO. And then if enteral nutrition is not tolerated after multiple trials, also you may have to go to the parenteral nutrition route. And speaking of, who should not get parenteral nutrition? Because of course it can lead to its complications, and also sometimes it's not indicated. Sometimes a person needs enteral nutrition. Sometimes you don't have to go the parenteral nutrition route. So if a person has an accessible and functional GI tract, if venous access is not available, if you really just can't get to their veins, if expected duration, which I mentioned before, is less than 7 days, just keep them NPO. For ethical reasons, for example, like we talked about before, depending on the family wishes, what they want, or if the prognosis does not really warrant any aggressive nutrition support, or if the risks outweigh the benefits. And then also fluid imbalances, just because we are delivering a lot of volume with parenteral nutrition formulas. But again, you can give parenteral nutrition, you just have to be careful with the amount that you're delivering. Usually that can be up to the doctor or up to the pharmacist. So like we said, there are 2 types of parenteral nutrition. You can either have a 2-in-1 or 3-in-1. 2-in-1 basically says, and this is more traditional, this is more commonly used, that dextrose and amino acids are in one bag, and then lipids are administered in another bag. So that's also called a little piggyback. So the dextrose, amino acids, and lipids are not all together. There's usually one bag for dextrose and amino acids, and then another bag for the lipids. And that's usually because a lot of lipids are usually in back order, usually not enough. And so a lot of the times the person will get only lipids for a certain amount of days at a time, only 3 days per week, or 4 days per week, 5 days per week. And also sometimes a person is already getting calories from lipids. So if a person is in the ICU, for example, and they're getting propofol, we know that propofol provides calories from lipids because propofol is in a lipid solution. And so we wouldn't want to provide them a parenteral formula that has more lipids, because we know that that can provide more lipids and therefore higher the chance of elevated triglycerides and all that stuff. So again, there's many benefits to having a 2-in-1 instead of a 3-in-1. But a 3-in-1 is also used, it's also called a TNA, or a total nutrient admixture. And that's when all the dextrose, amino acids, and lipids are all in one bag. They're all admixed into one bag. What are the complications of parenteral nutrition? So there can be a lot of mechanical complications. So there can be air in the catheter. There can be a catheter occlusion. A person can get line sepsis, venous thrombosis, so like a little blood clots in the vein, gastrointestinal complications. So we mentioned what happens when we don't use the GI tract, bacterial translocation, gut atrophy, fatty liver, cholestasis, very common if a person is not using their GI tract. Liver abnormalities, the person can get steatosis from overfeeding. So we always want to make sure that we're monitoring their liver function tests when they're on parenteral nutrition. Gallbladder disease from sludge buildup, which may lead to gallstones, again, from not using their GI tract. And then a lot of metabolic complications. So refeeding syndrome, overfeeding them, azotemia, so elevated BUN, hyperglycemia, hypertriglyceridemia, lots of electrolyte abnormalities, hypoglycemia. So definitely lots of labs that we want to make sure that we're checking on a frequent basis, just to make sure that we can, that we're not doing any of these and that we're preventing them as much as possible. And if any of the components of parenteral nutrition need to be adjusted, that they're adjusted in a timely manner before anything gets worse. And this is just a little note. When a patient on parenteral nutrition is being transitioned into enteral nutrition once their GI tract is beginning to work again, parenteral nutrition has to be weaned off. So you can't remove it all at once, because a person can get reactive hypoglycemia. Essentially, if a person was getting, let's say, insulin through their bag, through their parenteral nutrition bag, and then you suddenly stop the parenteral formula and they're not getting any dextrose at all and their insulin levels are still high, they can go low and they can go into hypoglycemia, and that can definitely be very dangerous. So always, number one, just make sure that you're always titrating down, weaning down. And then number two is that you can always discontinue, or the guideline is that you can discontinue the parenteral nutrition once the patient is tolerating continuously 60% of their needs enterally. So let's talk about refeeding syndrome very quickly, because that is a very big complication of not just parenteral nutrition, really. It's also a big complication related to enteral nutrition, and also just when a person is eating by mouth. I have seen this a lot as a clinical dietitian. It's more common than people would think, and it's definitely very dangerous. And we want to keep this in the back of our minds every single time that we are going to be feeding a patient, whether it's orally, enterally, or parenterally, if they are very malnourished or they have not eaten in a very long time. So what is refeeding syndrome? So refeeding syndrome is the effect of metabolic alterations during nutrition repletion, like I said, either orally, enterally, or parenterally, of individuals who are underweight, malnourished, or starved. So individuals essentially that have not eaten in a very long time or have not had enough nutrition in a very long time. So what happens is, what's the science behind it, is that a large carb delivery, once a person starts getting fed again and they start receiving carbohydrates, that a sudden receival of carbohydrates into their system is going to increase very quickly their insulin levels. And that very big increase or very high rise, very quick rise in insulin levels is going to cause a very, very quick shift of intracellular electrolytes that we need in order to metabolize that glucose that's coming into our systems. So potassium, phosphorus, magnesium, and also minerals and vitamins. So for example, vitamin B1, all of these are necessary for glycolysis and for the Krebs cycle and for the electron transport chain in order to metabolize our food, in order to get energy from carbohydrates, right? From glucose. So once a person gets carbohydrates into their system, their insulin is going to suddenly spike super high very quickly because they haven't had carbohydrates, they haven't had glucose in a very long time. That insulin spike is going to cause a very, very, very quick shift of those intracellular electrolytes into the cell, right? In order to support the proper metabolism of that glucose, the glycolysis, and all that stuff. And so once all those electrolytes and those vitamins go into the cells, the levels of those electrolytes and vitamins in our blood drop, and that can lead to many, many complications. So again, the most common ones that you're going to see drop immediately once a person starts going into refeeding is low phosphorus, low magnesium, and then also low levels of thiamine. And that is all associated with lots of clinical symptoms. So edema and fluid imbalance, respiratory insufficiency is a big one, which I have seen in the hospital, heart failure, and then also vitamin and mineral deficiencies, of course, because we are depleting them because they're going so quickly into our cells. So something very, very dangerous, something that you definitely have to watch out for. And again, it's a complication of not just parenteral nutrition, but I have seen it with enteral, and I have seen it when a person is eating PO. So just basic, you want to know the management of it. You don't have to go into it very deeply for the RD exam, but just so you guys are aware, you always want to begin nutrition low and slow in individuals at risk. So start it very slowly, and you don't want to reach the goal rate immediately. You can reach it within 5 to 10 days. Usually Aspen recommends starting at 50% of estimated needs and advancing by 250 calories every day. A fluid restriction with diuretics if they're getting edema. You want to replete. This is a big one. You want to replete their electrolyte levels and vitamin levels before symptoms start appearing, right? Especially phosphate. You want to give them thiamine before they start to eat. You want to supplement magnesium and potassium according to their serum levels, and always monitor their body weight, their fluid balance, their vitals, and their labs. Guys, it's a thing, very important. So please, please keep this in mind. So Which of the following patients would least likely require parenteral nutrition? A 55-year-old with persistent nausea and vomiting from chemo, a 44-year-old client with a high output fistula, a 65-year-old post-op patient with an ileus, or a 59-year-old patient post-appendectomy. So essentially what this question is asking you, in which of these cases is parenteral nutrition least indicated? So you want to make sure that you know all the different indications for parenteral nutrition as well as the contraindications. So if we start in order, a 55-year-old with persistent nausea and vomiting from chemotherapy, that's an indication, right? Intractable vomiting diarrhea is an indication for parenteral nutrition. So not A. A client with a high output fistula, a high output fistula is an indication for parenteral nutrition, so it's not B. A post-op patient with an ileus, again, an ileus is an indication for parenteral nutrition, so it's not C. And then we have a patient post-appendectomy, so removal of the appendix. That does not affect the GI tract in any way. The gut is still working after a person gets their appendix removed, and so that is not an indication for parenteral nutrition. So they are least likely to need parenteral nutrition. So the answer is D.
Imagine studying for the RD exam with an evidence-based study method, a clear study plan, access to a tutor, accountability, and expert instruction. It's all included in PassClass, the complete RD exam solution for studying with less overwhelm and more confidence. You can learn more about everything that's included in this complete program by going to allaccessdietetics.com/pass-class. Now you can hear from a recent graduate, Tanya, about her experience with PassClass.
Hi, my name is Tanya, and I bought All Access. I was gifted Inman with my program, but I didn't like the way it was set up because it was just Cliff Notes, and I read about All Access, and it really teaches you how to take the exam. I passed my exam on the first try on Wednesday, and I completely followed All Access program the way that it was explained, and I put in the time to study, and I utilized all the resources that they give you, which are a ton. Everybody there is so accommodating, and they really do go above and beyond when you have a question. And I felt really relieved that I only had one study material to use because it's really overwhelming process to take the exam. So I'm super happy I did it. I'm now a registered dietitian, and I really do thank their program and the way they teach you how to study and all the materials that they provide. So I definitely recommend it. It's worth the money 100%.
And then what is the most common complication associated with parenteral nutrition administration? Is it hyperglycemia, hyperkalemia, hyponatremia, or hyperphosphatemia? So I'm not sure if we went over this a lot, but I did talk about it as one of the complications. One of the most common complications when it comes to parenteral nutrition is hyperglycemia, or elevated glucose levels, because the glucose or the dextrose is going because the dextrose is going directly into the person's blood. So it's not going into the digestive system and then slowly being digested and absorbed. It's going directly into their blood. And so their levels of glucose in their blood can increase very, very quickly and to very high levels. So also, we want to keep in mind also that the other complications associated with parenteral nutrition are the ones related to refeeding syndrome, so hypophosphate, hypokalemia, and hypomagnesemia. So we can eliminate option B, we can eliminate option B, and then also hyponatremia, low levels of sodium are not really a big issue. It can happen, but it's not a common complication associated with parenteral nutrition, and so that's why the answer is A, hyperglycemia. Insulin is very commonly given at the same time in the parenteral nutrition bag to help with that. Okay, so the last thing we're going to talk about today are the calculations. So like enteral nutrition, there are two types of parenteral nutrition questions that you're going to need to know how to solve for this exam. So the first question is, how many calories and protein does the current rate of formula provide? So they're going to give you a current rate, and you just have to know how to solve for how much dextrose they're getting, how much lipid they're getting, and how much protein they're getting in terms of calories from each of those, and then just add them up all together. And then number 2 is glucose infusion rate, also known as GIR. So for the first type of question, here's an example. Let's do this one together. So a parenteral solution includes 65 grams of protein, 200 grams of dextrose, and 20% fat emulsion that runs at 7 milliliters per hour. How many total calories will this provide in a 24-hour period? So first thing you want to remember is that dextrose provides 3.4 calories per gram, protein provides 4 calories per gram, and a 10% fat emulsion contains 1.1 calories per milliliter, a 20% contains 2, and the 30% contains 3 calories per milliliter, right? So this is for all parenteral nutrition questions. You just want to keep this in the back of your mind. So now let's solve this. So it's asking for how many total calories this is going to provide. So they're giving us the total grams of protein and the total grams of dextrose. So all we need to do for that is just multiply that by the amount of calories per gram, and that's going to give us the total calories, right? So 65 grams of protein times, and that should say 4 grams per kilo per kcal. So 65 times 4 grams per kcal. Sorry, I'm 4 calories per gram. I'm sorry, guys. Excuse my thinking right now. That is correct. Ignore everything I just said in the past 10 seconds. Okay. Everything like it's on the screen is correct. So 65 grams of protein times 4 calories per gram, because then the grams are going to cross out, right? And you're going to be left with total calories. So 65 times 4 gives you 260 calories. The same thing with the 200 grams of dextrose. We know that there are 3.4 calories per gram of dextrose. So you just have to do 200 times 3.4. The grams of dextrose cross out and you're left with the unit of calories. When you do that, it gives you 680 calories. And then you just need to find the total calories that they're getting from the lipid emulsion. So the first thing you want to know is the total amount of milliliters that they're getting from that lipid emulsion. So we know that it's running over 24 hours, and we know that the rate of the lipids is 7 milliliters per hour. So in order to find the total volume, you just need to do 7 milliliters times 24 hours, and that gives you 168 total volume in that 24 hours, 168 milliliters. So now if we know that a 20% fat emulsion contains 2 calories per milliliter, once you do 168 milliliters times 2.0 calories per milliliter, the milliliters cross out and you are left with calories, so 336 calories. So to add everything up in order to find all the total calories, which is what this question is asking you, you do 260 plus 680 plus 336, and that gives you 1,276 total calories. So that's how you solve this question. Please ignore everything that I had said in the beginning where I was confused about the 4 and the 3.4. I don't know what I was thinking. Please ignore. What's on the screen is exactly perfectly right. Okay. And then this is kind of another type of question very similar to that one where you just need to know how to calculate total amount of calories. But this one is asking you to determine the total amount of calories from the carbohydrates only. So from the following parenteral nutrition formula. And just keep in mind that the amounts stated are per liter. So you have 300 milliliters of 60% dextrose, 500 milliliters of 10% amino acids, and 200 milliliters of 20% lipids. And this total nutrient admixture, so all of this is mixed into one bag, is provided at 60 milliliters per hour over 24 hours. So again, what we talked about before, the amount of calories per gram for dextrose, protein, and all the different fat emulsions. So for this question, you want to find first always, and this is just like the intro questions where you always want to first find the total volume. Also want to do that for these type of questions. So you want to find the total volume that the person is getting from the parenteral nutrition formula. So it's running at 65 milliliters per hour over 24 hours. You do 65 times 24, the hours cross off, and you're left with 1,560 total milliliters. But again, remember that this that they're giving you right here is all per liter. So you always want to make sure you're using the same units. And so in this case, let's just convert it to liters. So to convert from milliliters to liters, you just need to know that there are 1,000 milliliters per liter. So you just need to divide here by 1,000 and you get 1.56 liters. So now that we know the amount of liters that the person is getting from the parenteral nutrition admixture, the total amount of liters that they're getting, and we just need to find the total amount of calories that they're getting from carbohydrates. So that's from the dextrose specifically, right? We know that they're getting 300 milliliters of 60% dextrose. So if we do 300 milliliters times 1.56 liters, that tells us how many milliliters the person is getting from dextrose, which is 468 milliliters. And then we just need to multiply that by 0.60 because it's a 60% dextrose solution. So 468 milliliters times 0.60 is going to give you the total amount of grams, right? Always once you multiply the total volume times the percentage of either dextrose or amino acids, that's going to give you grams. So just make sure that you always convert afterwards from grams to calories. So 468 times 0.60 is going to give you 280.8 grams. And then to get the total amount of calories, you just need to multiply that by 3.4. And that's going to give you a total of 955 total calories. And then for the last parenteral nutrition calculation that you need to know for the exam, this is GIR, also known as glucose infusion rate. So the glucose infusion rate tells you, or it's a measure of how quickly the patient is receiving carbohydrates. So this is very important because it tells us whether or not the person is receiving too much carbohydrates, and we want to always prevent too much dextrose being infused through parenteral nutrition in order to prevent hyperglycemia, which we said is a very common side effect of parenteral nutrition. So typically this number that you get for the GIR calculation should always be less than 4 milligrams per kilogram per minute in order to prevent hyperglycemia and steatosis. So the milligrams per kilogram per minute is the units for GIR, and you're going to see why. And it's because this is the formula for GIR. It's grams of dextrose times 1,000 grams, and you're doing that in order to convert the grams to milligrams. You're going to divide that number that you get right there by the person's weight in kilograms. And then you're going to divide that number that you get right there, all of that, by 1440. 1440 is the total amount of minutes that there are in one day. So that's why the unit is milligram per kilogram per minute. And that's really the formula. So let's do it for this question right here. A female is 65 inches tall and weighs 130 pounds. She is receiving a parenteral solution of 5% dextrose at 100 milliliters per hour. What is her GIR? So again, here's a GIR formula: grams of dextrose times 1,000 divided by the person's weight in kilos, all divided by 1440. So the first thing we need to find is the total amount of, or total grams of dextrose that the person is receiving. So if they're getting a 5% dextrose, or also known as D5 solution at 100 milliliters per hour, to find the total grams that they're getting, you do 100 times, what 100 milliliters per hour tells you is that they're receiving 100 milliliters 24 times in one day, because they are receiving this for 24 hours. So that means that they're getting 100 milliliters per hour. They're getting 100 milliliters 24 times in one day. And remember that D5% means that for every 100 milliliters of formula, they are getting 5 grams of dextrose. So if we know that they are receiving 100 milliliters 24 times in one day, and that this D5 gives them 5 grams of dextrose for every 100 milliliters, then how many total grams of dextrose are they getting? Is just 5 times 24, and that gives you 120 grams of dextrose. Now you just have to plug it all into the GIR formula. So 120 times 1,000, you get that number, and you divide all of that by 59 kilos, because they tell us that the person is 130 pounds. So just divide that by 2.2 and you get 59. And when you do that, it gives you 2,033.9. And now all you need to do is divide that by 1440. So 2,033.9 divided by 1440, and that gives you 1.4 milligrams per kilo per minute. So this is below 4. So this means that it's within normal limits. The person is receiving a normal amount of dextrose. Okay. So that's GIR. So here are some practice questions that you guys can do yourself for parenteral nutrition. These are very good practice questions, so definitely do them. And then in the next slide, you guys also have your answers so you can check what you do, okay? Here's more answers to that question. I did it all myself and I put the pictures on the slide. Okay, so thank you guys so much for watching this video on enteral and parenteral nutrition. I really hope that you guys found it helpful. Please let Susan know if you have any questions, and she will gladly get those questions to me via email, and I would be more than happy to answer any of your questions. And always, 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 please remember that you guys got this. You guys know this. You guys have done this so many times in school and in your internship, and you guys are more than capable of passing this exam. You guys are more than capable of getting all the questions related to enteral and parenteral nutrition correct. This is such a topic that it's a topic that I love and that I love teaching about, and I love making it more easy to understand for students. And I love seeing students actually enjoy it, because enteral and parenteral nutrition, I feel like a lot of times students get very overwhelmed by it. But once you really understand it, you understand its importance, and you understand also how to do those calculations. And you also realize that for the exam, the RD exam particularly, it doesn't get much harder than a basic enteral nutrition and parenteral nutrition calculation. Your confidence just goes way up. And that's what I want. That's what I want for all of you. I want your confidence to go up, because you guys all got this. You guys are all dietitians already. You just have to pass this exam. And I know that you all will. So please let Susan know when you pass, because I love celebrating all of you guys' great news. So thank you guys so much for coming, and I hope you guys have an awesome rest of your day.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Dear Future Dietitian. I hope you got a lot out of it, and I also hope that you take action based on what you learned today. Now, if you have any questions at all, please reach out to us through our website, allaccessdietetics.com, or DM us on Instagram or TikTok. We are here to help you become a more confident registered dietitian to be, and make this journey way less stressful for you. So reach out, don't be a stranger, and we hope to hear from you soon. Have a great day.